YouTube, my name is Raymond and this video is going to be about some of the American fundamentals, and we're going to start with the Constitution. I feel as the country that I love so much, that I've been born into and that I've lived in all my life, goes further and further into a state in which I myself can't even recognize it anymore, that I think in order for all of us to be better Americans, we need to start somewhere, and I think the Constitution is the best place to start. Education is a very important power that the working class man and woman can ever ask for. So without further ado, let's get started here with the American fundamentals, starting with the Constitution. So what the hell is an amendment? An amendment is a formal change or addition to a country's constitution. In the United States, it's a way to modify the U.S. Constitution, adding, deleting, or clarifying parts of that document. As a side note, an amendment can only be proposed by either 2/3 of a vote by both houses of Congress, that's the Senate and the House of Representatives, or by a national convention called by Congress at the request of 2/3 of the state legislators. An amendment must have a 3/4 state's approval through state legislatures or a state's conventions in order to pass. So, in simple layman's terms, an amendment, as we said, is just a formal change to the Constitution. An amendment can only be proposed if 2/3 of both houses of Congress, that includes the House of Representatives and the Senate, or by a national convention called by Congress at the request of 2/3 of the state's legislators. That's how they can propose it. So basically, 2/3 of Congress have to propose this amendment by had to propose it or by national convention called by Congress at the request of 2/3 of the state's legislators. An amendment must then have 3/4 of the state's approval through state legislatures or state conventions in order to pass or be ratified. So in order for an amendment to pass, it then has to go through 3/4 of the state's approvals through a state legislatures or state conventions in order to pass. So there's the proposal, and then there is the the ratification. The first 5 amendments. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and the right to petition the government. The Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms as well as a well-regulated militia. The Third Amendment prevents the quartering of soldiers in private homes without owners' consent, particularly during peacetime. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures and also requires warrants based on probable cause. The Fifth Amendment guarantees rights related to criminal prosecution, including grand juries, protection from double jeopardy, self-incrimination, due process, and requires just compensation for private property taken for public use. Now, to expand upon that just a little bit individually on all of those, the First Amendment is pretty simple. As we said, guarantees the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of press and assembly, and the right to petition your government. These are necessary in order for everyone to essentially be able to not feel oppressed in their speech or how they practice their religion, and it allows the press to essentially be, it guarantees their freedom too. So that way, the public has an idea of what's going on outside of their 4 walls of their home through the press. Assembly and the right to petition the government is, again, a really necessary thing to have, because there are times where your government may be doing things you don't like. So the First Amendment guarantees the right for us to petition and assemble, in that manner against the government. The Second Amendment, the one I'm sure you hear all the time, is the right to keep and bear arms as well as a well-regulated militia. This essentially is in order to have the right to defend yourself, protect yourself against well, anything from like invaders to like, potential governmental overreach and etc., etc. The Third Amendment, as we just mentioned, prevents the quartering of soldiers in private homes without consent. This way, basically, soldiers can't just pop up in your home and, just take a nap when they're tired, particularly during peacetime. This used to be a big issue, but through the Third Amendment, we don't have to worry about soldiers just coming and taking a nap in our houses. Through the Fourth Amendment, protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures and also requires a warrant based on probable cause, as we just discussed, and essentially that's just as concrete as it gets. This way, law enforcement cannot just search you whenever, and it also requires warrants in order to search you based on probable cause. So this is supposed to protect you against, just random searches and seizures. The Fifth Amendment guarantees rights to criminal prosecution, including grand juries, as we just mentioned. So essentially, this is to help protect you from, as we said, prosecution, or guarantees rights, related to criminal prosecution, protects you from double jeopardy or being tried for the same thing twice, self-incrimination, the I plead the fifth. If you choose not to incriminate yourself, you can say I plead the fifth whenever, like an officer is asking you questions or whatever, so that way you don't incriminate yourself if you feel like you may be doing that. It guarantees due process, which essentially means that you have that the state, or that the that the nation must go through due process in order to convict you of a crime, and everything has to go through all the bells and whistles, and requires just compensation for private property that has been taken for public use. That essentially just means that any of the property that has been taken from you, you must be compensated for it if it's been used for public use for whatever reason. In Amendments 6 through 10, we have the Sixth Amendment ensures the right to a speedy trial, an impartial jury, the right to a lawyer, and to confront witness. Excuse me. The Seventh Amendment preserves the right to a jury trial in civil cases exceeding a certain dollar amount. The Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive bails, fines, and cruel and unusual punishments. The Ninth Amendment states that the listing of certain rights in the Constitution doesn't mean other rights aren't retained by the people. The 10th Amendment reinforces the principle of federalism, reserving powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution for the states, or are for the states or the people. So to dig a little more into that, the 6th Amendment ensures that you get the right to a speedy trial and a impartial jury and the right to a lawyer. So that way you'll never have to just defend yourself. You will always be able to have a lawyer as per the 6th Amendment and to confront witness. The 7th Amendment preserves the right to a jury in any civil cases exceeding a certain dollar amount. So, essentially, whenever your case exceeds a certain dollar amount, which I believe it originally was $20, I don't know if that has been updated for inflation. Admittedly, I did forget to look that up as I was making this document. But essentially, over a certain dollar amount, you will have the right to a jury trial, as per the 7th. The 8th Amendment prohibits excessive bails and fines and cruel and unusual punishments, as we just discussed here. And essentially, this way you will not be subject to very hefty bails and fines, and you are protected against cruel and unusual punishments, such as, like being burned alive or something to that extent, just as a more extreme case. The 9th Amendment states the listing of certain rights in the Constitution doesn't mean that other rights aren't retained by the people. Now, this one was a little tricky when I first read it, but essentially, in simple layman's terms, just because a right isn't stated in the Constitution does not mean it does not exist. So, for example, the right in order to decide what you want to wear today, or the right to the right to fly, to walk wherever and go wherever you want. It's just as a smaller example. Just because these rights aren't listed in the Constitution doesn't mean that you don't have access to them. And this also essentially allows for more breathing room to keep on adding more and more amendments and rights into the Constitution itself. The 10th Amendment, in layman's terms, essentially means that powers that are not delegated to the government by the Constitution are therefore for the states or the people. This way, the government doesn't get too much power, and the government doesn't have powers that aren't specifically in the Constitution itself, that it's already been given, because no one government will ever survive or will ever, be, healthy if it has too much power. Amendments 11 through 19, then 11th Amendment. Now, actually, excuse me, before we proceed with that, the first 10 amendments are essentially the Bill of Rights. These are the first 10 amendments that, when the Constitution was essentially ratified, it's been called the Bill of Rights. So that's why I kind of separate them a little bit. But going back here, Amendments 11 through 19, we have 1795, the 11th Amendment, limits the ability of individuals to sue states in federal court. 1804, the 12th Amendment, revises the procedures for electing presidents and vice presidents, requiring separate ballots for each office, and clarifies what happens if no candidate receives a majority of electoral votes, in which case, if no majority is met and the House of Representatives chooses the House of Representatives chooses the president for the top 3 candidates, with each state delegation having 1 vote. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery and involuntary servitude except for punishment as a crime. That's a really controversial one at the end of that one right there. In 1868, the 14th Amendment grants citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and guarantees equal protection and due process under the law. In 1870, the 15th Amendment prohibits the denial of voting rights based on race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. In 1963, the 16th Amendment authorizes the federal government to levy an income tax. In 1913, the 17th Amendment establishes the direct election of senators by popular votes. The 18th Amendment in 1919 prohibits the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors or alcohol. In 1920, the 19th Amendment grants women the right to vote. Now, before I explain these a little deeper, excuse me one moment, I will be right back. I have to clear my throat. Excuse me. I apologize for that. The 11th Amendment essentially limits, as you know, it's more self-explanatory. You cannot sue state in federal court. The 12th Amendment here essentially is just a list of rules for how the presidents and vice presidents are supposed to be elected. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery except for punishment as a crime, and that's the big loophole that I myself cannot ever agree with. Slavery, no matter the purpose, should never ever be a thing, even as a crime, because, well, that's how we got into how far we are now with that. The 14th, essentially, if you're born here or you're naturalized in the U.S., guarantees equal protection and due process under the law of the United States. So you are a United States citizen if you are born here or you're naturalized here. The 15th essentially prohibits, as it says, the voting rights based on race and color and previous conditions of servitude, so everyone has a right to vote. That was in 1870. 1913, the 16th Amendment authorizes the federal government to levy an income tax. It's pretty self-explanatory. 1913, the 17th also establishes direct election of senators by popular votes there, as we just mentioned. 1919, the 18th is basically just a prohibition. That's when the prohibition started, with the whole dry laws and everything else, as an attempt to essentially move away from alcohol as the main source of the income for our nation here. And the 19th, granting women the right to vote. Pretty self-explanatory there. It's actually insane that women were not allowed to vote for so long, even after, black men were able to vote. It's actually insane. It's really crazy to think about. Almost done here. Amendments 20 through 24. 1933, the 20th Amendment sets the dates for the beginning and ending terms of the President and the Vice President and Congress. 1933, the 21st, repeals the 18th Amendment, which ends prohibition. 1951, the 22nd Amendment limits the president to 2 terms in office and prevents anyone who has served as a president or acting president for more than 2 years of another person's term from being elected more than once. 1961, the 23rd Amendment grants Washington, D.C. electoral votes in presidential elections, even though D.C. electoral votes in presidential elections, even though D.C. is not a state. D.C. is still not a state and does not grant such representation in Congress. 1964, the 24th, abolishes poll taxes, which have been used to disenfranchise voters. To dig into each of those a little bit more, the 20th Amendment, pretty simple, just sets the beginning and ending dates for when the president, vice president, and Congress can go, which I personally do feel should be a little more updated in some ways for Congress itself. Sometimes, it's a discussion you can have. But 1933, the 21st, ends prohibition. There's a whole big old story with that. The 22nd limits the president to 2 terms, and if you've acted as a president or served as a president for more than 2 years under another president's term, you can then not be elected more than once. So this prevents the same president from having power for too long. The 23rd essentially grants Washington the power to vote for who they feel, or to get their voice out for who they feel should be the president, even though D.C. is not a state. And then the 24th abolishes poll taxes, which was used to disenfranchise voters to vote. Essentially, you can't charge people to vote. It's not going to slide. Amendment 25 to 27, though. We're almost there. 1967, the 25th Amendment clarifies procedures for presidential disability and succession. In the first example here, because that one was a little vague, in the first example here that I gave, in the case of removal of the president from office or his death or resignation, the vice president is now president. In example 2, in the case of a vacancy in the office of the vice president, the president shall nominate a new vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. 1971, the 26th Amendment lowers the national voting age to 18. In 1992, the latest one, the 27th Amendment, prevents laws increasing or decreasing congressional pay from taking effect until after the next election of Congress. So to expand on those a little more, 25th, again, just clarifies the procedures for presidential disability and succession. I put some examples down here because, like I said, it was a little vague. It's actually a few more articles of it in there. These are actually some of the articles with the examples 1 and 2 I gave. But as we mentioned, those are just some examples of a long list of procedures for disabilities and successions for the president. The 26th, pretty simple, lowers the age to 18 because, hey, if you can go die for your country at 18, you should be able to vote by 18. So that's why a lot of people see 18 as the age of when you are an adult in the United States. And the 27th essentially just prevents Congress from getting pay raises, or I guess pay decreases too, but let's be honest, typically that's not going to happen. It's usually a pay raise. But prevents pay changes from taking effect until after the next election of Congress. This essentially allows voters to get their voices out on the ballot and kind of weigh their opinion on all of that. And finally, I have a little more notes here just to wrap this whole thing up. Remember that your individual voice does matter, and that only together with our working class country, or with our fellow working class people, men and women in this country, can we actually achieve solidarity. Remember, it takes all of us in order to achieve solidarity. We cannot achieve anything as peoples by hating each other, by coercing each other, by working against each other. We have to be able to put all of our differences aside and work towards the nation that we all want this nation to be, as great as we know it can be. And that's going to take us all. Remember, you have more in common with your working class men and women than anyone else. No billionaire gives a single damn about you. These congressmen and these legislators and everyone else, they don't care about you as much as they should. They don't. In reality, you have way more in common with that random coworker or that random lady shopping across the aisle from you or wherever else than you will anyone else. So make sure to treat your working class men and women with respect, because these are the people that make up our country. Remember, it is up to all of us as a people to hold our government and ourselves accountable to a high standard. Pardon the little typo right there towards the end of that. But remember, it takes all of us, not just the black folks, us black people, not just the white folks, not just the Spanish folks. No, it takes every single one of us, all of us, in order to hold ourselves and our government accountable. The government can only get away, well, the government slash the US, people can only get away with things for as long as we let them. So we have to be the ones to put our foot down and really make sure that we're heard and that our Constitution is taken seriously. We can and will be a better nation as long as we work with and not against each other. Remember, just one more time, we will not be able to achieve anything if we work against one another. We have to work with each other in solidarity in order to be the nation that we know we all can be. And that means for things for fighting for basic rights such as health care being publicly available to all. That's a right that everyone should have. No one should be scared to call their doctor or to go to emergency room in a first world country. We should not be starving. That's not right. Look around ourselves, America. Is this really what we want? Our children under fire potentially when they go to school, scared to go to school? Our working class men and women not able to go and afford college for themselves to progress in their lives? More and more people turn to very violent means of making money because they feel that there is no other way out. No safety nets to keep us, our people, out of danger when harm does come our way. This ideology that everything is your fault and that you are the only person who can pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you just need to work harder. Is this really what we want? Is this really what we stand for? I think we need to start questioning that and asking ourselves, what do we really want? And what we really should be wanting, in my opinion, is an equal America where everyone has the same opportunities to succeed. And there are things in place for when we do slip up, for when we do make a mistake, for when, people do go through mental health crises. We need to have safeguards in place. Those aren't handouts, America. Those are safeguards to make sure that we don't spiral into mental health crises and that we have all these things happening in our nation that are happening. Remember, poverty affects one so much so, terrifyingly so, and crime is only a reflection of how good or bad that state, that nation is doing. When you see all these terrible things, remember, these people usually aren't doing this because they want to. They're usually doing it because they feel like they have no choice, or they've been indoctrinated to some way that has affected their normal way of thinking. And that should not be a thing here. We should be able to take care of our own and everyone else in this so-called first world nation. So with that being said, I just wanted to go over some of the American fundamentals and have my little piece here towards the end. Remember, America, your voice does matter. Alright? Remember, 99% is bigger than 1% by a landslide. And if we were to all finally take up in a peaceful way, take up ourselves, go out on these streets and demand what we know we should be having, we can do it by the end of the week. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. I hope that this video has definitely helped, encouraged, or educated, inspired, or any other word you can think of to some of you. And to those of you who may not have understood some of this, or maybe I wasn't clear enough, or maybe I rambled on a little too much, I do apologize. I still am learning all of this stuff as you guys are, and I just really want the best for all of us. So I hope you guys enjoy my video, and if you did, leave a like and a comment and subscribe even. I don't plan to have this be a one and done thing, like as I mentioned in my description, I do plan to talk about other things including philosophy or like I said, just other basic history in other basic histories. So, with that being said, my name is Raymond, and stay safe out there, America, and I think it's really time for us to consider what we want this nation to be. This is a Black Perspective, signing off.